Hi, I'm Scott Wynn. Welcome to my shop. Today we're going to talk about smoothing curves on furniture parts mainly. The go-to tool for this is the spoke shave. Its small sole, even though it's flat, not actually matching any curves, is very short, and that allows the blade to contact curves of surprisingly small radii. It's a handy tool, two-handed. A lot of strength can be applied. It's less tiresome because of that. But basically, it is a hand plane. Blade's bedded at 45 degrees. And this short sole, while it allows it to get into curves, brings the tool some shortcomings. The main one is when you're fairing long, gently curved surfaces, this doesn't give you much reference, and it's very hard to get a continual, unwavy, sinuous curve. Spoke shave has two forms. The second form is the wooden, just called a wooden spoke shave. No further delineation of its construction or anatomy. However, whereas this spoke shave is basically a hand plane with handles on both sides, with the blade bedded at 45 degrees. This is basically a spoke shave. It's mounted in a wood base usually, sometimes has this brass third plate here for wear, but that just forms a limitation to the depth of cut that you can do. I don't like to use these for dried wood furniture parts unless it's been rived, split out of stock. When this is used for dry stock that's been sawn, the 25-degree bevel angle, no chip breaker, no really controlling throat on that, can just tear out large chunks of wood. So much so that oftentimes the chunks will come out and jam the throat. The metal spoke shave doesn't have a chip breaker, and except for a few occasional designs, it doesn't have an adjustable mouth. Most people use them to roughing out. If you run into tear out problems when you're doing your curves, you have no alternative. You can't readjust the chip breaker, which is not there. And I actually haven't used some of the models that have an adjustable throat. They're not very common. I suspect that's because they don't work very well. Here's something you might want to investigate, is the Chinese wooden spoke shave. Very cheap, affordable, and works really well, especially for the price. So, if we got a long fairing curve like this, how do we get rid of the waviness and we get basically a gentle curve? Well, we have to extend the sole. This short sole does not give enough reference. Now you can use a bench plane and you can kind of roll it along the curve. It works pretty well. It takes a lot of user input. You're probably going to have to come back with a shaped sanding block and take out all the slight high areas, which will show up when you get down to the final smoothing, which means you'll have to go back over it. Another thing you can use is a plane with a depth adjuster. So I took this old plane. You can do this with other planes. I think a low-bodied plane, a Japanese plane or a Krenov plane, is more suited for this than a wooden body Western plane. Certainly would be an engineering feat to put it on a Stanley. The advantage of the Japanese is it has a long area in front of the blade. This gives you good reference to start to cut. And if you make your own plane, say in a Krenov style, have it at least centered. Western wood body planes have the blade set back only about a third from the front, and that is really awkward in starting the plane. So to use this, I just tapped a couple of machine screws into the end of the block, slotted a piece of, in this case, plywood. Originally I had a piece of cherry on there, which lasted for a few years and eventually broke. This has held up pretty well. This is slightly rounded to keep it from catching mainly, and to ease a little bit in the adjustment. So what you want to do, you adjust this up and down so that the work or the curve you're using just touches the blade and it touches this. So that will adjust, that will make your curve. And this works pretty well. It's got some user input. Sometimes a little tricky to get the adjustment right. But if you don't get it right straight off, you can come back and tune it up a little bit. The only question remains is, if I really wanted an accurate cutter, is to put another gauge on the back. I've managed, especially with this large reference area in front, to get by without doing that. I would probably get slightly better results and slightly more accurate, because when you come off, you're doing a little bit of this. So if you need really accurate results, you put a plate on the back there. So I have adjusted this already, or at least hopefully. So we'll give it a little try. This has been bandsawed. If I try it out a little bit, you can see the shiny spots here. And you can hear it hit the high spots. Got one more spot there. Now I'm doing this for demonstration. Theoretically, you'd have a line on there. You'd be a little shy of the line, and you'd be very aware as you approach it. Now I can cheat a little bit and shorten that radius by taking the reference off. See, it went there, but that's liable to show up in the finish. So let's straighten that back out again. There we go. Now, I didn't do this end down here because I'd be cutting into the rising grain there. But that's basically the use of that. Holding device. You got long thin pieces. Hand screw. Put a shim, maybe 1/16 of an inch veneer on one jaw, and you can then put that in the vise, and the vise will just clamp on the jaw with the veneer, and this will allow you to adjust the hand screw. Little plug for the book. Some of this may be hard to follow. We have visuals in the book, written descriptions, photographs, drawings. So here's the beginning of that chapter on doing compass planes. And it goes on. So quite a variety of Japanese planes in this one. Some of you may be asking why not the Stanley 113, I think is the number, which is the adjustable metal Stanley plane. When I first started doing this a long time ago, the plane was actually quite expensive. I think it may have been in production still. I'm not sure. But anyway, I thought maybe I was only going to do one curve project. In a way, I had one that was confronting me. I needed a curve. I could get a small Japanese plane for a fraction of the cost, which is still somewhat true on the smaller sizes. So I made one to fit that particular curve, and then later on I had another project, different curve, so I ended up with a small assortment rather than the 113. I have nothing against the 113, but I've never tried it. I could say what it appears to be, but it has its followers, and it's something you may want to try. To do a concave curve, it's a similar contact points. So the curve contacts the plane at the very beginning at the blade and is slightly relieved at the end. Doesn't really make contact at the end. So I have a couple planes here. This one coincidentally matches quite well. And this is shorter. I often use a shorter one. If you can see that, it's quite a bit shorter in a radius to take off the high spots from my poor bandsawing job. And then come back with one that closer matches the curve and smooth it out. So the thing you want to remember is the start. That's the most difficult part. And with a plane that has a smaller radius than your curve, you have to concentrate to keep that blade in contact, because you can pull it where it's not in contact, or it's in contact. And you have to get a good start. Just so the blade engages, you can't be doing this, and you can't be doing it a fraction after, because you'll end up with a little lip there. So you have to get a nice clean start, feel that, and pull it. Let's take that high spot off. All right, so a lot of the bandsaw marks are gone. Curve probably varies a little bit. Let's see, you can see how inaccurate it is. Not making a full-length cut from the beginning. And you've got a meeting down in the center, which is the tricky bit. But the advantage of using a nice hand plane, you can back the blade off a little bit, and you can also tighten down the chip breaker to eliminate that transition. So there we have a pretty smooth curve that's probably smooth enough to be used. Now save the cutoff. You can use this to make a sanding block. You may not need the whole length, you can cut it off a little bit. You can glue or use sticky back sandpaper, and then you can finish evening that out and get a proper finish for any finish you're going to put on there. Now this is a little bit of chicken or the egg, which came first. You can actually put a piece of sandpaper on here initially and use it to smooth and even that curve out. And of course, get rid of it here, put a piece on here, and finish up this curve. There are curved bottom spoke shaves. I've had this for years. I've never actually been able to get it to work to where I like it. This geometry, as far as I can tell, is incorrect, and I haven't wanted to take the time to refile this. This appears to be the high point, and this appears to be the high point. So this whole area in between here and here doesn't contact the work. I don't think that's on purpose. I think that's just bad sanding. The spoke shaves with a short radius are really tricky to use. requiring that same trying to find and rotating the wrist as you go along. Really like the planes better. If you have difficulty, now this is a small narrow piece, if you have broader pieces, hardwood pieces, there's a couple things you can use. Here's a really nice instrument. It's just sometimes invaluable. It's a chair maker scraper, a chair devil, easily made. Blades at 90 degrees to the sole. The sole has a slight radius. They come flat, they come slightly rounded. You don't need much rounding to get into most areas. And this will smooth figured wood without any tear out. And it's often used by chair makers to smooth spindles and other chair parts where the spoke shave would just continue to tear out. It doesn't work on softwoods particularly, but it's particularly marvelous on hardwoods and figured woods. Pretty easy to make. Another alternative, especially for larger areas, is the buckhorn scraper. So-called because of the shape of the handles. Used like this. Looks somewhat familiar to a travisher. But here we have a scraper mounted in the body at about 80 degrees. Has a hook, 45 bevel and a hook. And the bottom has been shaped, and I've made these for different projects. This one's concave across its width and very slightly convex along its length. Use it for figured hardwoods, where a plane is just, as they say, not going to cut it. This one is pretty straight along its length, very slightly concave across its width, convex across the width, flat along its length. As you can see, that's pretty heavily spoon bottom. And this one is convex in both dimensions. And the old scraper blades have two edges on them. So I don't have a blade for each one of them. I just grind the shape for the other one on the top edge and reverse it when I need to use the scraper. So what do we do if we have a very short radius? These planes, pretty short plane actually to get them down to that radius. We can use the curved bottom spoke shave, which, as I said, I have difficulty. That one's not really properly set up. Finger planes are a good answer. They can do a variety of shaping, some pretty small radiuses to get in there. Very small spoon bottom. Also another spoon bottom. So you can make them in a variety of shapes and curves and sizes as to your needs. Whoops, the same thing goes for this plane, is getting a good start. And it's an exercise in concentration to get that plane to rotate smoothly through that curve. Beautiful. Very nice. And a couple more tools that you're not going to see too often, but you might want to give a try. One of them is used actually by car body repair people. And it's this tool here. This has a single cut file on one side, and you can adjust. There's a limitation, needless to say, on the radiuses you can get out of this, but for long gradual radiuses, radii, It goes both ways. There it goes. The file on this is flexible enough to do those radii. So, cut there. A couple of the woodworking catalogs, I think I've seen this in, I can't remember which one. Like I say, it's used in auto body shops for smoothing out Bondo, mainly, I think. The file I don't find particularly fast cutting, but sometimes it's just the right tool. I especially like it for templates with the composite materials, which are harder on my plane blades. I'd rather just file them. So you can adjust that curve. Now this is a template for a seat. Came off the bandsaw here. There's a little high spot, so the curve's not real smooth. This actually changes this in radius down there. So I'm going to try and fair out the transition in the bandsaw body. Needs a little work down here. Now I'm going to put this high spot over here. Maybe we'll straighten it out a little bit. Should work. Not too bad. Needs a little more work. One last thing. Besides the sanding blocks, as I said, you can use the offcut for a sanding block. I've made this little one up for fairing long curves. Glue sandpaper to the bottom, piece of flexible plywood. I think this is actually bending plywood. With a couple handles on both sides. So you can get the convex curve, and then I won't quite do this curve, but you can press down in the middle to get a concave curve. And that's for removing and smoothing any high spots left from the plane work, the edge work. So there's a few things there. I hope that helps you, gives you some ideas, and expands your alternatives of work. Thanks for watching.